paying their bill for them. Next slide, please. This is an example of the CalWATRS user interface, the interface that the reporter would see when they log in. And you can see on the left-hand side, there's needs your attention. Those are the top things that the reporter would need to work on. For example, if a report is due, or maybe there's something pending, those will be brought to the reporter's attention right up front. In the middle, you can see that the water rights information is organized by tabs across the top. So no matter what your complexity of water right, from simple to complex, you can access all of your information from this one user interface. Next slide, please. This slide is an example of our new geospatial information system platform that's part of CalWATRS. Water moves in space and time, and in order for us to track water, we need to know where it is. So GIS helps us with that, and we've developed a new reporting interface here to allow the reporters to plot their points of diversion, place of use, or other features that they may find of interest or necessary. You can see on the picture here, we have various geospatial features, including point of storage, point of rediversion. Whichever water right complexity or configuration should have the feature needed to report to us. Also, the GIS system has the ability to allow spatial file uploads. It's a little technical, but sometimes say a consulting firm may have a lot of GIS files that they don't want to draw in by hand, and they want to upload a file instead. So we give them that ability. The final bullet here is GIS attributes that can be automatically added to plotted data. This is helpful for when, for example, a point of diversion is plotted. The public land survey section or other geospatial data that is sometimes pretty complex and difficult to understand can be automatically attributed to that reporter's report. This really reduces burden on the reporter for understanding those sort of complex geospatial aspects. Next slide, please. Another feature of CalWATRS is a new organization data structure. Now, this is for the reporters. Again, this helps mainly the larger reporters that have many offices, for instance, maybe U.S. Forest Service or a larger consulting firm, and it gives the larger reporters or agents of reporters the ability to assign the water rights that are being worked on to different branches, regional offices, as well as staff. This should help companies help the water rights reporters to report more easily and effectively.
Jeff Parks, the product owner for CalWATRS and do all the day-to-day development of this. I think it's worth highlighting that our current system has no front-end user interface. There is no consolidated place for water right holders or other people that deal with the division to see the things that they have either applied for or sent to us or commented. So a major shift in this new system is the ability for them to see everything in one login user profile type place, which is part of the point of this modernization. That's a huge thing that most systems have that we don't and cannot do with our current system. And this is a great example of this is large organizations, they don't know how they are seen in our current database. And it's complex and it's messy and they don't know all the details behind it. This new system will allow them to actually organize themselves and the different parts of themselves that own different water rights, because it gets complicated very fast, especially if you consider large government organizations or large corporations. So this will be a big change, but a big change for the positive in understanding water rights.
Thank you, Jeff. Yeah, it's a very good point. There's a lot of new features that we're adding into CalWATRS that we've never seen before and the reporters have never seen before. So we're really looking forward to working with reporters on figuring out how to use this in the best way possible. Next slide, please. We want to touch briefly on something that was mentioned at the introduction, which is actually digitization. The CalWATRS data system that we were talking about is a major aspect of our future water rights reporting, but also getting our paper records into a digital format is fundamental. And so we've developed a digitization team. Here's a very small part of the team. We have a large bullpen on the 14th floor where we're digitizing records right now, today. We crossed 500,000 records a few weeks ago, so we are on our way to getting these records digitized. We have a great culture developed on our 14th floor around this concept of digitization. You can see on the left, there's some of our signage that we put out, just showing what we're up to, giving our weekly tallies, and just giving our staff some time to show their artistic side as well. Next slide, please. A really big part of digitization is not just simply getting the record into a digital form, but it's making that record accessible and retrievable. And this requires metadata tagging. And what we're looking at here is a user interface for tagging our water rights data. Now on the right, you can see there's some very minimum basic fields. What is the primary date, the subject, signatory, things like that. And you can see our classic identifiers below that, water right ID, map ID. These pieces of information will be attributed to each document so that we can find them in a lot of different ways very quickly and according to whatever search criteria the user may want. The tagging process is the most time-intensive piece. It requires water rights expertise to do accurately. We are currently using a two-phase approach where we do minimum tagging at first just to make sure that these documents are digital and accessible. And then we'll do a more advanced tagging where we start to put the more granular details into these documents to ensure that they are absolutely accessible depending on what sorts of needs the requester is looking for. So I just wanted to add this two-phase piece of information around digitization. It's not simply scanning. There's also a very intensive metadata tagging process. And we intend on having many water rights staff within our division be the experts behind how these tags should operate and where they should be applied.
Vice Chair.
I just have a question. So could you maybe talk a little bit more about this document? If I had information about, say, the person's last name or the creek, I would just do a search and hope to be able to find this. Maybe if you could explain a little bit more about if I didn't have this document, I wanted it, but I just had some information.
Sure thing. Yes. So the tags themselves, these metadata tags are what you'll be searching for. So for example, when this document is tagged with the first and last name, that last name would be one of the search criteria. And you could also add other criteria like the creek name to hone it down as well. And so those more granular details are the details that we will be adding in to the system.
I think one of the other things that we're going to be doing is, Brent mentioned the geospatial element to CalWATRS. And so what we'll also be doing is plotting all of these on a searchable map. And so if you did know, say, the creek that it was on, you could look for that creek, you could search for it just like on Google Maps and kind of hone in, and you would see this point, which would be the point of diversion, and click on it, and it would access all of these scanned documents as well. So there's multiple ways that you should be able to try and get to the information. One is just a bulk data search, but another is, hey, look on the map and see what's up and available. And just a note that we won't have everything available when CalWATRS goes live. As Brent mentioned, we're about 500,000 documents in. There's 7 million plus documents. So it's going to take us a while to get there, but just going to kind of continuously update it and populate it as we get through it.
The third leg of that stool is that you'll see the application numbers on there. One of the main things we're getting in that initial round of getting this document into our database is that application number, because once we have that, we don't need to put all the other things that are on this document. We know that in our database. And so we're pulling in also, if we can get a key identifier of what application is related to, we can pull in what tributary, what watershed, all those other things that will help find that document in relation to what record it's coming in through.
Okay, with that, if there's no other questions, next slide, please. Another part of this that's very important towards organizational change management is our Upward Advisory Group. And the UAG, or Upward Advisory Group, is a diverse team of water rights interests from throughout our state. And they were convened to advise on the development of our new CalWATRS water rights reporting platform. And I just provide a brief history of our meetings here, including an anticipated meeting in May 2025. So just a brief recap. We originally met September 2023, went over the concept of the UAG, conducted our first feedback activities, and in the second UAG meeting, May 24, we began to collect more granular feedback on our system and looking at what we had designed, what we were working on, and where those things met the needs of the UAG. We received very supportive, positive feedback, great advice on our system. The third UAG meeting was held just recently, February 5th, and we actually did a live system demonstration to the Upward Advisory Group. Jeff Parks did a great job doing live demos on demonstration systems. Again, received very positive feedback and more ideas for ways that we could streamline our user interface and make things more understandable for the reporter, which is a major aspect of UAG, is getting the reporters' feedback to us while we're developing to make sure our product meets the needs of the reporters. We anticipate opening the system up for actual hands-on evaluation and testing by UAG, hopefully this May. We have some cybersecurity things we're going to work through, but that is the anticipated plan, is to get UAG inside of the system looking at it this May. Next slide, please. So this timeline at the bottom is very small and difficult to read. The intent was not to show the granular nature of this timeline. It's a development timeline for those that are curious what sprints are and things of that nature. But the important part here is just to show what's happening between now and July of this year. So one of our main tasks between now and July is to refine the CalWATRS user interface. We build the functions first, and we look at the form and aesthetic second. So that's what we're working on right now, is making sure that it's the reporting process is smooth and makes sense. We also are beginning to talk with the larger and more complex water rights holders about enrollment. We had mentioned that there's a new ability to organize your water rights differently. So we want to work with the large complex reporters to get that hashed out, figured out, and discussed in advance of go live. And then the part that I mentioned was providing UAG access to CalWATRS for hands-on testing around May. And you can see that there in the orange where it fits on our timeline. Go live green is expected in July of this year. And go live just means that the system is available for people to begin enrolling. The water year ends in October, so the actual reporting would not begin until after that. But we want to open it up early to make sure everybody has a chance to get enrolled, get their information in there. Next slide, please. Now through, say, July, August through 2026, we will be working on continuing the enrollment into the system. We will, of course, begin our outreach to medium and smaller water right holders. Just wherever assistance may be needed, we want to be there to help folks out. We will continue the support through the reporting deadline and basically into perpetuity. We also, very importantly, need to scale up our digitization and metadata tagging processes. We have spent significant time figuring out the basics. Now it's time to really get efficient and start to get our numbers up. And then that final bullet is another sort of permanent piece of this that is implementation of a new data governance policy. A data governance policy is intended to ensure that the data that are collected are high quality now and into perpetuity, and the associated standard operating procedures provide the how to staff of how to ensure that those data are high quality, which database they should go into, audits of the data, things of that nature. So with that, I believe it does bring us to the end of the CalWATRS aspect of this. Any further questions from the board?
I have some comments, but I'll save them till the end of the presentations. Thank you.
Thank you. With that, I think we'll hand it over to Sierra Kinnison and Pablo Ortiz.
Thanks, Brent. Good morning, board members. My name is Pablo Ortiz. I'm an environmental scientist with the Division of Water Rights, and I'll be presenting on water measurement and reporting regulations, commonly referred to as SB 88, which the division is currently in the process of updating through a regulation change. Like upward measurement regulations are an important component of modernizing our approach to water rights administration. Next slide. So some background about our current regulations. They were adopted in 2016 in response to a historic multi-year drought that preceded it. The lessons learned from that drought included the idea that to properly manage for water unavailability, we needed better data on when, where, and how much water was leaving the system. So what do these regulations say? So if a diverter diverts over 10 acre-feet of water per year, they must install a measurement device or implement a method to measure their diversions and submit their measurement data to the board with their annual water use reports each year. There's an additional requirement for diverters over 10,000 acre-feet per year or 30 cubic feet per second in the summer. Those diverters must also maintain a web page publicly available with data updated year-round, at least weekly basis, and that's commonly referred to as the telemetry requirement. This measurement data helps us to forecast and plan for limited water supplies, manage all elements of water rights, and protect senior water rights holders' priority, as well as the environment. Next slide. So we can look at implementation of the regulation over the last few years. Starting in 2018, we've collected measurement data from diverters in their annual reports, as well as reports and information about their devices. So if our goal is to collect measurement data through these data files from everyone who's subject to the regulation, as you can see at the bottom of this chart in green, we've only managed to do so for about 20% of diverters. And this rate of submission hasn't increased meaningfully over the last few years. Some marginal increases, but nothing significant. As you can also see from this chart, there are a select number of diverters that are attempting to comply with the regulation by installing a device and reporting it to the board, but still failing to submit their measurement data each year. And there's also a subset of diverters who may have a water right for over 10 acre-feet, but are not diverting in a given year, so they have nothing to measure. Next slide. Data usability, big issue. So while there are people that are submitting data to us, that doesn't mean we can effectively put this data to use. So on the left in that inverted pyramid, what that's showing is that of the number of diverters who are submitting measurement data, that 23% last year, only a fraction of those are following best practices for formatting their data files. So that includes putting headers in the first row of the file and having descriptive column headers that include date, time, and volume, 3 really important things for water measurement. Files should follow a standardized format if we want to be able to put them to use without individually reviewing every file. We receive over 1,000 different unique data file formats each year, and that's kind of impossible to analyze without individual staff review of each one. CalWATRS will be able to effectively leverage measurement data for modeling and water rights administration, but will rely on those standardized uploads, which means that the data will be needed to be interpreted immediately upon submission instead of after staff review. Next slide. To kind of bridge these gaps in compliance and data variability, the division has undergone outreach in the last couple of years to both listen to diverters' challenges through listening sessions and also provide guidance materials and outreach to help people comply with the regulation. But even after this outreach, compliance remains stagnant. We reviewed data file submission rates last year and this year, and it's still around 20, 23%. So a lot of these issues, including data standardization and also addressing diverter confusion about the regulation, have revealed the need to update the regulation with reg change. And so staff have worked on this change for the last year and introduced a draft version of those proposed changes last November. And with that, I will turn it over to Sierra to go into more detail about these regulation changes.
Thank you, Pablo. My name is Sierra Kennison. Good morning, board members. I'm an engineer with the Division of Water Rights. Next slide, please. Okay, so the main goals of this regulation update are shown here. First is to align the requirements of the regulation itself with the requirements of the CalWATRS platform. The regulation update team and the CalWATRS Upward team have been in close coordination to make sure that the requirements of each align with each other. Next is to improve the quality and usability of measurement data. So this is really to get at that inverted pyramid chart that Pablo showed. Currently, we have over 1,000 different data file formats submitted each year. So we really need standardized templates to be able to efficiently analyze that data en masse. To streamline and improve the clarity and structure of the regulation, during all of our outreach, one of the biggest complaints we received over and over again was just that the regulation is incomprehensible. It's really difficult to understand who's subject to it, what the requirements are. So we've really tried to take a stab at that. And then lastly here, promote adaptability to changing water data needs. Currently, the regulation attempts a one-size-fits-all approach for all of California. And California is very hydrologically diverse, so it doesn't really make sense to have that one-size-fits-all. So we've really tried to tailor the regulation to the needs of individual watersheds. Next slide, please. So how we've done that, the first and most obvious change is restructuring it to improve readability. I want to preface this by saying this looks a lot more daunting than it is. We've added paragraphs, we've deleted paragraphs, moved things around. We basically struck out the whole thing and rewrote it. So it looks much more intimidating than it actually is. Most of the requirements are the same, the intent is the same, but it looks drastically different. We've refined some key terms. Notably, we've removed the distinction between a measuring device and a measurement method. Now, if it collects data, if it measures, it's considered a measuring device. And for aligning the reporting deadlines, currently groundwater recordations are based on the calendar year, whereas all other water rights are based on the water year, which spans from October to September. So in this update, we're aligning groundwater recordations with the water year as well for consistency. Number 3 here, to address the data usability needs, we're requiring standardized formats and templates within CalWATRS for data file submissions. Number 4, this discusses a few different things. So to better understand how much water is diverted, where water is diverted, when water is diverted, we really need to understand where you're measuring. So there will be requirements to identify the measurement location. The telemetry requirements that Pablo mentioned, in the existing regulation, the use of the word telemetry is misleading, so we have opted for a different term referring to them as large diversion requirements to better capture who is subject to them. And we've clarified who is subject to them, what they need to measure, how they need to report. Notably, instead of posting data weekly to any public website, it'll go directly through CalWATRS, so it'll be in one standardized place. For points of rediversion, the existing regulation is pretty vague about how points of rediversion should be measured. In the update, we've said, if you're measuring your points of rediversion, great, please continue to do so. If you're not, and if we really need that data to better understand availability, we may ask you to measure your points of rediversion as well. And for professional qualifications, qualified individuals are required to install measuring devices and verify that you're meeting the requirements of the regulation. We've expanded the eligibility for qualified individuals, so it now includes other professionals like hydrographers, water treatment operators, water distribution operators who have those necessary skills. For alternative compliance, this is a different pathway of providing and measuring data, or measuring diversions and providing that data. So we've allowed additional flexibility here for any kind of approach that is more effective or more efficient at collecting this data. And then lastly, in CalWATRS, diverters will be required to register an email address. This affects more than just the SB 88 regulation. This also affects water rights reporting. So we've updated those regulations as well to include an email address requirement. Before moving on, I want to point out that, as Pablo mentioned, we did release some draft text in November. We received lots of excellent comments, and so we've done our best to incorporate as many of those comments as we could. Next slide, please. In terms of timeline, everything highlighted in yellow here, those are opportunities for public participation. So yesterday, actually, we submitted the proposed reg package to OAL, the Office of Administrative Law. That included the notice of proposed rulemaking action, the draft regulation text, a statement of reasons explaining why every single change was necessary, and an economic impact assessment. All of those documents will be posted to our website and also be emailed out to everyone who is subscribed to our email list. As early as next Friday, OAL should publish the notice of proposed action in their notice register. This would begin a 45-day comment period. This is the public's main opportunity to provide comment on any of the changes in any of the documents. After 45 days, we will hold a public hearing where staff will give a presentation explaining all of the changes, and there'll be additional opportunity for comment there. Once we've reviewed all of the comments and incorporated changes, If that has resulted in substantial updates to the regulation text, we'll have an additional 15-day comment period as necessary. And the plan is then to take the finalized text to a board meeting anticipated in summer of this year. That'll be the final opportunity for public input. Once the board approves and considers and adopts the regulation, we will then submit it to OAL for final approval. And currently we are targeting an effective date of October 1st, 2025, which would align with the reporting year. And with this update, the first reports affected would be due in 2027, February 1st, 2027. And with that, next slide, please. Are there any questions for any of us?
Well, first, just a lot of acknowledgement and thanks. Yeah, we're at an incredibly exciting moment. I feel it's a culmination of a lot of investment, a lot of time, and a lot of focus in the water rights space. So both between the regulation and the update of it, and then also having a data system to really complement and accomplish what we're trying to achieve here. Just a lot of thanks. I know there's a lot of teams that have been working hard these last years, and it's seen. And again, it's a really exciting opportunity we have to just bring us into this century and really begin to manage water in this state, water rights, in a way that we all collectively deserve, to have more faith in the system, but also to help us manage both the dry extremes and the wet extremes as well. So this system is so fundamental to the decision-making of this body that, again, the $60 million investment, the momentum that we have is really exciting. And I have to acknowledge and thank the governor and the legislature for prioritizing this, for giving us the resources that otherwise would be very difficult to draw out from our water right holders without, incredible raises on their fees. And so this is a significant asset and investment. And I just want to thank the leadership that has really been seen throughout this process, bringing in water right holders, working across, vast technical teams here to achieve a product in record time here where, and thanks also goes to CDT with their, innovations in their procurement that have allowed us to actually accelerate this project in a way that otherwise, we'd take us likely a decade to actually get to this moment. We've been able to do it in a few years. And so just start out with a lot of thanks and a lot of appreciation and look forward to, again, this moment we're at where we're really going to be accelerating a lot of the work that hinges on the data within our water rights system. Just one question, kind of when it comes to the system, we kind of had a preview as to what water right holders might experience when they go in. What will the general public, academia and others that, also I know, go into ERIMS, try their best to figure out what's happening. What will be the kind of public facing components of the site and how will folks access if they're not a water right holder themselves?
I'll start off, and Jeff, feel free to jump in. So one of the big changes will be the electronic content management system and being able to see the records. I think that's the most sort of known and understood benefit that the public will see. Also, one of the things that we've done is the CalWATRS data system, the data that it collects, will be moved up into a data warehouse. This is a new sort of technical ability that we've built in. That data warehouse gives us a lot of ability to share our data in brand new ways. So no longer just using, say, for example, data.ca.gov, which is great, but giving additional capabilities beyond that to give the public the ability to look at our data in a more granular way. Also, giving the ability for more data experts that understand things like SQL to be able to access our data through those more complex technical methods.
One of the less visible aspects of this is that people have extensive access to our data. People have extensive access to our data now, but that data is complicated in that it has not been consistently entered into databases over the last 30-ish years. And that makes it very hard. We get a lot of questions from academia and others trying to analyze our data of what does things, what do specific pieces mean? And it's hard for us to answer because of changing practices. So in a way, this is also our New Year's resolution point, and that we get to start fresh and establish data governance policies going forward from here of how we enter data to make it more consistent for all those public users.
No, I'll just add in, I like to give an example when this comes up. It was the very last bullet on the SB 88, or sorry, on the upward portion of the slides where Brent mentioned data governance. And so you go back 110 years to 1914 when we started our quote unquote modern water rights system. And you start tracking, different folks who have a water right or you change address. And so you have John S. Smith. But then you may also enter it as J.S. Smith. You may also enter it as J. Stan Smith. You may also enter it as JSS. Each one of those may be a unique water right. It may not. And over the course of 110 years, there's kind of been a loss of some of that institutional memory or knowledge. And so this is our opportunity to kind of put new protocols in place that says, this is how we're going to track these things so that we don't have this issue going forward. That will be a challenge, but it's a really important kind of step to take. And it's very nuanced, but it's a huge workload. So this, what have we been doing the last couple of months? The system was kind of built out in October, November of 2024. We're doing things like data cleanup, trying to figure out how do we address these legacy questions. Sometimes it will require us mailing stuff out to people and saying, hey, can you go and tell us, is this you or is this somebody else? It's looking at the flow and kind of the just overall look and feel and kind of the user experience, user interface of the system itself, making sure we have the language just right. That all takes a long time to kind of dial in, but we're getting close.
And from an expectation setting perspective, when this goes live in July, it's not going to magically make our data better day one. It will. We have an expansive new toolbox to use with both internally and externally, but it's going to take a few years of using the new system to get that data to better quality. So it will be beneficial for everyone, but also I like to temper things a little bit in that it's not going to magically make our old data better. We have done substantial data cleanup, but there's some things where there's a wall of what we can do. So.
I really appreciate all that. And, when I say this is really a culmination, it includes the Open Water Data Act and so much of the open data work that I know Greg Gerhardt, our head of Office of Information Management and Analysis, has really been spearheaded on. But this is, first, I feel, real project where all of those threads are coming together, all that learning around the need for data management and governance and the long-term vision for the project. And so just incredibly appreciative of that as well. I guess the other point and question I would just have is, this is but one system of the over 60 enterprise systems that this board has, and we have a lot of need for this sort of modernization to take place in some of our other programs. What are some of the ways in which that we're able to use, although this investment is in a water rights data system, use some of these investments to kind of benefit the institution as a whole as we grapple with similar data challenges on the water quality side or the drinking water side? I know there has been that consideration, but just kind of wondering if you could kind of help unpack some of that good work that I know has gone on.
Yeah, I'll provide a bit of an overview, but then also see if anyone else over on the exec management team wants to jump in as well. More than anything, it provides a template. And I think it also provides some long-term resources that we can rely on going forward. So we mentioned there was a staff supplement when we were awarded the initial upward funding in 2021. That included, I think it was 5 staff for Department of Information Technology, DIT, and then a number of staff for both the division and the Office of the Delta Water Master. And those staff in DIT, a huge nod of thanks to them as well. Kieran Kizredi is a manager for a whole unit that focuses on kind of enterprise system build. And so they were responsible for serving as our liaisons in DIT. And that was by design, right? So we asked for staff in DIT and the division so that we could kind of function as translators amongst ourselves. We knew the program needs, DIT knew the technical needs, and we could work back and forth and interchange between them. And as a template for future system builds and enterprise system builds, I think it serves as a really good one. We've developed this fantastic relationship. We've been able to move very quickly on the project, and So if there are future investments in other data systems in the future, it serves as a model for how that relationship could go. I think they will still require additional staff. That's one of our huge lessons learned, is that it does require a lot of staff and focused staff, not staff that we're pulling from, part-time in other places. The other lesson learned is that it's very expensive. You look at that price tag of $60 million, that's kind of eye-opening to say the least, but that's the price for kind of modernizing these legacy systems. Hopefully there is an efficiency of scale so that if we start to rely on, say, certain platforms, software, so CalWATRS is going to be built on Salesforce, for example. There's licensing efficiencies if more than one system relies on Salesforce, and so you can start to combine those over time as well. But it still, I think, requires a significant investment upfront to kind of get that system built.
So I'll throw a note of caution in. When you build when you build enterprise systems, what you're doing is compromising a little bit on each of the component systems that go into it to allow for compatibility. And so that's a discussion at each, as you go forward with a new enterprise system, how much do you want to conform the new system to the requirements to make it enterprise? In the past, we have gone both ways and had problems in both directions, having standalone systems that don't communicate well with other ones, but are built to meet the exact needs of that program, and enterprise systems that allow for communication across, but are not as specific. And so it's a negotiation that will go on between programs and our IT staff and our executive staff on how much enterprise we want between water rights and water quality or drinking water, and how much independence we want. And it's not a one size fits all or a simple question to answer, but we are looking at the concept that systems are more sophisticated than they were 15 years ago, and you can do more with communication now than you could 15 years ago, 20 years ago. I think CWIX is 20 years old now, and that's forever in a data system, and it really does need to be modernized.
I really appreciate that and agree, especially right now, the pace of change, there's a lot happening. There are a lot, and I think that, you look at our systems and, ERIMS, the successor system for our water rights data system here, as an example, we quickly pulled that together, as I understand, because we became a fee-based organization and we needed a way to be able to collect fees. And so that's what kind of pushed us first onto that system. And I think this is our first real opportunity to really rethink that and try to future-proof, to your point, Mr. Bishop, our systems here. And I think that it does start to come down to, though, where we house data and how that data is interoperable across, divisions. And I think that there are some exciting lessons that are definitely coming out of this project. And just, again, very appreciative of all the work that has gone on. Looking to fellow board colleagues. Vice Chair.
Well, just thanks to the whole team. And this is really impressive in such a short period of time with the number of records. And I know it's just the beginning. Would like to just focus my comments on public participation. I want to thank you for all the additional opportunities that you provided the public, in particular regulated entities that are going to be using this system. I think I mentioned in the briefing, but just, for the public to hear that I sat in on a couple of those sessions, and just really good dialogue back and forth. And I do appreciate that the regulated community is focusing on how to make this work instead of fighting it. So a couple of questions. Looking at the ability for larger organizations to feed in, different branch offices and that sort of thing, is that it's an effort to get away from a one-size-fits-all approach, for these entities. But what sort of dialogue did you have? I know that so much of the underreporting is from the smaller, the sort of the ma and pops. But if a larger organization gets something wrong, that can really make a difference for, with respect to the information that we have. So just want to get your comments on that, the ability, how this system works so that it's not a one size fits all and it really is user-friendly, for these organizations.
I think a good example, not to pick on the Forest Service, but they don't realize that they have 40+ records of themselves in our system because different forests come in at different times with different water rights. This would allow them to be able to put together how they manage all the rights that are under USDA and how those are then split, and then what staff under each forest work on those, so that if we need to reach out about Forest Service water rights, we can do it to one group rather than having to do it to 40 separate groups who may or may not be talking to each other, which if it goes to annual reporting and we need to quickly say things are not looking right with whatever aspect of it, this gives us a much clearer chain of command to go to for these larger organizations. The other part is that balance of going after who uses the most water, as far as, looking at what is reported versus the number of people that may not report to us. That's always going to be a hard balance. But part of this system is we'll be able to much more quickly evaluate these things because our data system will be able to ad hoc pull reports on these things and give our permitting and enforcement staff or exec very quick views on what's going on at any given time, and make much faster decisions, and hopefully also allow our staff to spend more time on actually processing the things they need to process rather than doing a lot of the workarounds that are nested in our daily work lives to use our old data systems.
Great. And then the next question, and I know that, we'll have the rulemaking come before us, but if you could comment about the customer experience and things that you're doing, especially for those smaller water right holders. And I know that with this going to electronic, some of them are still like I am operating in the old days where, we don't like to use computers. So, and when we do, it gets a little frustrating, when a pop-up comes up and it's not a real person. So what are you doing to facilitate that transition?
That's a great point. So one of the aspects of getting the system into actual production is making sure that the user interface is elegant, and a rough user interface, as we see with CWIX, causes bad data. So one of the things that UAG brought up and we're working on right now is describing in each field where somebody has to report something, the actual layman description of what needs to be reported, and put the legalese in a little button that can be clicked for those that do want that sort of legal justification, code references. Some folks do want that. We also had some advice given at the last UAG meeting to also have another little icon perhaps that you click that gives not quite a legalese, not quite the layman, but the reason we're asking for it, so that we could start to really put up front, not just what needs to be reported, the legal justification for it, and why, what functionally we're looking for, like why it's being asked for.
And the bigger picture comment of, I don't have access to a computer, this is something we've seen for a lot of years now, especially since our annual reporting has been digital only for, I think, a decade now. So there's no magic solution to that. However, this new system does allow people to have family members create an account and help them log in. On top of that, I think similar to what we did when cannabis regulations first came online, I think it would be really beneficial for us to do targeted local workshops where we come with 10 laptops and say, if you want us to help you get into this new system, come down now and do that. I think that would be a great exercise in public outreach activity.
Good, thank you.
Thank you, Vice Chair. Board Member McGuire.
Yes, agreed. Kudos on all the hard work over the last couple of years. It's really remarkable to see this system get to the point where it is today. And I think so much of our interest is, just to echo the other board members' comments about really demystifying the water rights system. And it's going to provide benefits not only to the general public, for decision makers on the policy space, but also for the water right holders themselves. And so I think this is really a win-win for everybody who's involved with water in California. So thank you for this work. It's exciting. It's also daunting in some ways because it is such, a lot of it looks for ease of use, but I think the underpinning and really understanding how this information is going to be shared is really important to be clear about. So I have a couple questions for you, and one is actually about the interface part. So I'm a visual guy, so I like maps, and so I was just wondering, I didn't see it in the presentation. I saw where you can add points and places of use and things, but will there be to the point of, if I'm a member of the public and I'm just curious, I want to pull up a watershed and see where are all the diversions, where are the water rights in a watershed? Is there a map interface for this as part of the rollout?
Yes, and you don't have to be logged in to use it, similar to what we have now, where you can access a GIS version of looking things up.
Okay.
Again, it's something that will continue to improve. It will be available day one. What it does and the functionalities underneath it, I think will improve over the next few years as we understand the new system and what it can do. One of the things that's hard is a lot of what we've built is to get new records in cleanly when people submit new applications. But the reality is that most of our records exist. They're not, people are not mass applying for new water rights now. So the harder part is how to update our existing records, which still live largely on paper, into that digital realm so that it can be shown on a GIS page. That will take longer. We have plans for it. We have ways to do that using the new tools, but it's again, something that will take concerted effort, probably focused on higher impact watersheds at first, and then expanding out to the state as a whole.
Okay. Yeah, I'm glad to hear there's a public facing view on that. And I think part of this, just reflecting on the 500,000 records, which is great. I have been digitized, but there's still 6.5 million to go. So there's a lot. So just being clear about what's in there and what's not, I think is part of the outreach, just being, communicative about that and the work that's still ahead, that this is a big step forward, but there's still work to do. My next question is about reporting. And so this kind of, I think, I'm not exactly sure where the question goes, but somewhere between SB 88 and CalWATRS, because it really is a reinvention and an update of how the reporting happens. And I'm thinking about alternative compliance. And so if I were, again, just say I had an alternative compliance plan that used OpenET, right? So I'm using ET-based data to report my water diversions. Will this new tool, or how are you addressing that type of approach? I mean, you talked in the presentation about adding some greater clarification and flexibility for alternative compliance. How is that going to work with the new CalWATRS system?
So I'll start with, it's helpful to understand how all the measurement information in general comes into the board right now. It's nested within annual reports and only nested within annual reports. The new system and a lot of the updates being made relative to SB 88 are because in the new system, the measurement method, who's doing the measurement, the measuring what the device is, will now be its own record type. And that may seem simple, but that doesn't exist in our new system. So being able to separate out what comes in annual reports and what's being measured over time, all the time, is an important first step in kind of splitting these things apart. So on top of that is incorporating alternative compliance plans. We'll have the ability for people to both submit alternative compliance plans in the new system and facilitating existing ones, like specifically the Delta ACP, where OpenET is used. So that is a third-party tool right now that we support somewhat, but is managed completely outside of us. But in Connects, we have built into the new system, the ability to have Delta ACP reporters have their water use reporting point towards OpenET. That's still being built, that's still being proved out. We can't demo it today, but it's, one of the directions we chose to go was to incorporate that specific alternative compliance plan into the new system.
I'll just add on there that with our new toolbox and all these new data sets and the quality of our data, we give ourselves the opportunity for new alternative compliance plans in the future that we may not have had the tools or infrastructure to actually implement. So there's something there that may be unknown, but very exciting for our future and how alternative compliance plans could be implemented.
And Sierra or Pablo, I don't know if you want to touch on changes to the ACP process in the new regulations a little bit, talk about how we're trying to make them a little bit easier and more applicable.
Yeah, so in the existing ACP forms, you have to meet a certain criteria to submit an alternative compliance plan. It requests a lot of information that is pretty duplicative with other information that we have in our eRIMS database. So we've really pared down the list of what's required. We've expanded who's eligible. So really anyone who has a more effective or efficient way of measuring, we're really just after the data. So we've really just tried to be as flexible as possible.
Great. Yeah, I thank you for those clarifications. I was thinking about the Delta. That's what popped into my head, of course, is the biggest example, but I know there are other alternative compliance plans out there. And I'm not really familiar with what all those strategies are, what's been approved and what's not been approved, and how all those work. So I think that goes to the outreach and communication, and as the rollout happens, helping with that transition, particularly for those large groups that have come to expect a certain way of reporting and are really going to have to adapt here. And it sounds like you're doing everything you can to simplify and streamline it, but nonetheless, it's change, and change is hard for people. The last question I have is kind of a bigger picture. When it comes to, you're taking all this data in, so we're going to be requiring telemetry data, water diversion reporting. At the end of the day, does this tool, are you expecting that this tool will be used for water availability? So water, because this is this came out of the drought. The reason we have SB 88 is because of water shortage. So are you envisioning, or is the intent that CalWATRS will be used for that type of signaling of water shortage in areas?
Yes, very directly, but not just water shortage, right? It's water availability as a whole. And so that affects a whole host of other things that we work with: new water right applications, change petitions, temporary recharge permits. All of these depend on kind of that water availability question. And you're spot on that, SB 88 came out of the 2014-15 drought, where we really didn't have a good handle on kind of the instantaneous demand within the Delta watershed as a whole. And so the SB 88 trailer bill legislation was passed, and then the regulations were developed shortly thereafter. But we never had a data system that was actually capable of capturing that data. And so this is kind of the intersection of the two of them, so that we can get that better picture, that kind of higher resolution snapshot of what we think demand is. It might not be on the hourly basis, maybe it's more daily or weekly, but it's still going to be better than the monthly time step that our current kind of data architecture lives in. And so if we can start to get a better picture, not just during times of shortage, but during average years, during wet years, that's really going to help us understand what water is actually being used, where it's being used, when it's being used, and then how that could be, better allocated to a whole host of other beneficial uses.
And to be clear, CalWATRS will not model water availability. It will collect data in a cleaner way and in a much more organized way so that it will feed our modeling programs that do the water availability faster and cleaner. Part of this, it's all about data governance and documentation. This is part of our data governance plan overall of how to then access our data and make sure everyone's pulling the same data at the same time.
Thanks. We have a lot going on when it comes to this topic broadly on different policy arenas and different watersheds. And so I just think the more we can be absolutely transparent about what it is that this tool is going to be used for and where it is that these different types of policy decisions will be made when it comes to water availability or water unavailability, curtailments, et cetera. I think it's really important here in the coming months in particular that we're very open about that and what this tool is expected to do and not. So thank you for those clarifications. It's really helpful.
Yeah, agreement, and thank you, board member. I think what's exciting is, really being able to move ourselves toward a more real-time administration of the water rights system, knowing that we need that granularity, but we're not there yet. And I think it's important that, we chart out the path for folks. And this item was an attempt to start to do just that. So just really appreciate all the great comment and work that's gone on. Looking to fellow board colleagues just to double check that no further comment. And really appreciate and look forward to what will be further update, I know, as we unroll this. So thank you. All right, that wraps up item number 2, our update on our water rights data system and governing regs. Now we will move on to item number 3, which is an item from the Division of Drinking Water regarding prioritization of drinking water regulations. I'll give a moment for folks to swap out. Good morning, Mr. Polhamus, Ms. Hall. Good to see you both.
Good morning. Thank you, Chair Excool. Welcome, board members. I'm Darren Polhamus, Deputy Director for the Division of Drinking Water, and we are going to do our annual run-through of proposed drinking water regulations. A couple little changes that we'll describe this year as we go through it, but a lot of familiar stuff. But I will turn it over to Ms. Hall, who will do the bulk of the presentation for us.
Good morning. Next slide. So I'm going to start by reviewing progress on recent priorities, followed by the proposed priorities for this year, and then finish with a preview of future year priorities. Next slide, please. Starting with the prior year priorities updates, most recently the board adopted the cross-connection control policy handbook in December 2023, which took effect July 1st of last year. And then deletion of the cross-connection control regulations from Title 17 and addition of references to the policy handbook instead were added to Title 22, and that was approved by the Office of Administrative Law last November. The direct potable reuse regulations were also adopted in December 2023, and they met the statutory deadline and took effect on October 1st of last year. And then the hexavalent chromium maximum contaminant level, or MCL, regulation was adopted last April and also took effect October 1st of last year. Going farther back, the revised perchlorate detection limit for purposes of reporting, or DLR regulation, took effect July 1st of 2021 and allowed for a 2-stage compliance schedule to initially lower the DLR from 4 micrograms per liter to 2 micrograms per liter on July 1st of 2021, and then on January 1st of last year to drop from 2 to 1 microgram per liter. Since then, more than 80%, or approximately 31,000 community and non-transient, non-community water system sources now have perchlorate results reported under the new DLRs, with some laboratories reporting to concentrations as low as 0.1 microgram per liter. Of those, over a third were detections, approximately 11,000, with a few hundred sources seeing their highest reported concentration between the current public health goal of 1 microgram per liter and the former DLR of 4 micrograms per liter. And then in a more recent development, pursuant to a court order, US EPA has committed to issuing a proposed primary perchlorate drinking water standard by November 25th of this year and a final regulation by May 21st of 2027. And then last on the prior year priorities, microplastics, we had the definition adopted back in June of 2020, the policy handbook adopted in September 2022. We've had ELAP method accreditation offered since September 2022. and we held a pre-monitoring order workshop back in May of 2023. Since then, studies to identify sample collection and sample cleaning methods are ongoing. Once completed, we'll look to begin 2 years of water system sampling. Next slide, please. For this year's proposed priorities, we'll be starting with several maximum contaminant levels, or MCLs. At the top of the list is per and polyfluoroalkyl substances, or PFAS. I want to stress here that while there are several MCLs and other projects on the proposed priorities list, PFAS is our top priority and primary focus for this year. PFAS are synthetic compounds widely used in nonstick cookware, food packaging, stain repellents, firefighting foam, and other applications. For a timeline, back in July of 2018, the Deputy Director for the Division of Drinking Water issued interim notification response levels for perfluorooctanoic acid, or PFOA, and perfluorooctane sulfonic acid, or PFOS. In August of 2019, revised the PFOA and PFOS notification response levels. In 2021, we issued a notification response level for perfluorobutane sulfonic acid. In 2022, issued the notification response levels for perfluorohexane sulfonic acid, or PFHXS. And last fall, we received from the Office of Environmental Health Hazard Assessment, or OEHA, a recommendation for notification level for perfluorohexanoic acid, or PFHXA. Also last year, OEHA issued final public health goals for PFOA and PFOS in April. And that same month, the US EPA finalized its PFAS primary drinking water standards regulations. Next slide, please. So this slide shows where all those numbers landed. This is where we're at right now. Next slide, please. In the meantime, DDW has also been working to develop information to support our own eventual rulemaking. In 2019, monitoring orders were issued for approximately 600 source water wells. Based on the monitoring results, general orders were issued in late 2020 for about 900 wells located near prior detections, and in 2022 to address Department of Defense sites. In October 2022, all then existing monitoring orders are rescinded and new orders were issued. Sources subject to the October 2022 orders were selected based on proximity to likely PFAS discharges, as well as sources near to those with confirmed detections. We've been continuing to investigate the extent of PFAS contamination of water sources, most recently courtesy of a 2023 budget allocation toward PFAS research funding focused on method development and monitoring. Monitoring orders were issued last spring to water systems serving disadvantaged communities. As the results come in from our contracted laboratory, notification regarding these sample results is going out to water system customers. Division of Drinking Water staff have also been collaborating with the California Department of Public Health's California Regional Exposure, or CARE, study on PFAS, which evaluated correlations between exposure to PFAS through drinking water and blood serum levels. Overall, the study found that PFAS levels in studied Southern Californians were lower than those found nationally, that 43% of study participants lived in a service area with one or more PFAS detection in the drinking water source, that for PFOA, PFOS, and the overall sum of the 11 PFAS analyzed, there were not any significant findings, but that for PFHXS, study participants served by water systems with detected PFHXS had 25% higher serum levels than those served by systems with no detected PFHXS. Next slide, please. The Division of Drinking Water is proposing to address regulation of PFAS in 2 stages, with stage 1 focused on incorporating federal requirements to attain primacy approval with limited adjustments. With the federal regulations for PFAS being markedly different than existing organic chemical regulations, we're tentatively planning to mirror EPA's approach and place the PFAS regulations in a new article within Title 22. Placing the PFAS regulations in with the other organic regulations would make the existing article very difficult to wade through for some of our water systems and operators that would not otherwise have to engage with unrelated requirements in the existing article. With the proposed approach, though, recognizing that there has been interest from the discharger community and the regional boards, we do want to point out that this would mean no new numeric water quality objectives for PFAS and basin plans as a result of DDW's rulemaking. And we did let regional board executive management know what our tentative plans were last fall. Next slide, please. Stage 2 would involve establishing a more comprehensive regulatory approach to PFAS, using the statutory option for a treatment technique in lieu of an MCL when it is not feasible to ascertain the level of a contaminant, as it's certainly not feasible for us to try to track down and ascertain the levels of more than 10,000 individual PFAS chemicals. The treatment technique approach would potentially rely on a limited number of sentinel or indicator PFAS chemicals to represent treatment and removal efficacy for various subclasses based on chemical structure, health effects, and/or optimal treatment technology. Potential additional California-specific changes might include increased focus on developmental health effects and potential reevaluation of analytical sensitivity for technological feasibility. Next slide, please. In continued preparation for both stages 1 and 2 of the PFAS regulations, the division intends to request a public health goal for PFHXS in the near future. Continue working on analytical methodology, including broad spectrum testing for adsorbable organic fluorine, or AOF, to look at PFAS chemicals as a whole, which is being funded by the same budget allocation as the disadvantaged community monitoring, and method validation for trifluoroacetic acid, or TFA, an ultra short chain analyte through our laboratory contract with the California Department of Food and Agriculture, which is expected to be completed this spring. Finally, we're planning to issue a statewide monitoring order to all public water systems, including the transient and non-community water systems excluded from the federal rule. This monitoring order would supplement existing results to complete the initial monitoring requirements of the federal regulation and aid in identifying additional PFAS analytes of particular concern in California for potential public health goal requests. A draft order would be made available for public comment in the latter half of this year before taking effect early next year. Next slide, please. Moving on to our second on the MCL list this year, we have consideration of revisions to MCLs for disinfection byproducts, including both total trihalomethanes and haloacetic acids. Disinfection byproducts are formed when disinfectants react with naturally occurring organic materials in the source water. In 2020, OEHA issued revised cancer-based public health goals and non-cancer-based health protective concentrations for each of the 4 contaminants comprising total trihalomethanes: chloroform, bromoform, bromodichloromethane, and dibromochloromethane. The revised public health goals will be considered in the next MCL review. The current MCL is set at 80 micrograms per liter for the combined sum of those 4 trihalomethanes. Next slide, please. At the end of 2022, OEHA finalized first-time public health goals for 5 haloacetic acids, along with health protective concentrations for 3 of those. The current MCL is set at 60 micrograms per liter for the sum of 5 haloacetic acids. Shown here, both haloacetic acids and trihalomethanes will likely be grouped for a combined MCL rulemaking for disinfection byproducts in the next few years, with N-nitrazodimethylamine, or NDMA, and another disinfection byproduct possibly joining that group to allow consideration of public health and cost optimization. Next slide, please. Next, we have arsenic, which is a naturally occurring element found in soil and mineral deposits. It's also found in commercial and industrial products such as wood preservatives, sealed ant bait, agricultural pesticides, anti-fouling paints, and pharmaceutical compounds. Arsenic is found in approximately 20% of public water system sources with hexavalent chromium present. The current state and federal arsenic MCL is 10 micrograms per liter, with a detection limit for purposes of reporting of 2 micrograms per liter. OEHA has issued a public health goal of 0.004 micrograms per liter based on bladder cancer and a non-cancer health protective value of 0.9 micrograms per liter based on cerebrovascular disease. US EPA has established an arsenic maximum contaminant level goal of 0. Work on this MCL revision is high on the MCL list because it's by far and away our least protective MCL relative to the PHG. It has, however, been bumped down a spot in this year's list as we plan to allow more time to explore developments in feasibility for very small systems, potential health impact considerations related to reductions in arsenic concentrations in the food supply and relative source contribution, and to evaluate incidental removal associated with treatment installed to comply with the recent hexavalent chromium MCL. DLR revision is planned to proceed in advance of the MCL as part of the metals DLR rulemaking package scheduled for this spring. But we are planning to proceed with a call for best available technology and practical limitations to treatability this spring, followed by a preliminary cost workshop and eventually notice of proposed rulemaking. Next slide, please. Fourth on the list of proposed MCLs is N-nitrazodimethylamine, or NDMA. NDMA is part of a larger class of disinfection byproducts known as nitrazamines and is formed in chloramine disinfection of drinking water and chlorine disinfection of domestic wastewater. unintentionally formed in certain industrial processes and formerly used in production of liquid rocket fuel. While there's currently no federal or state drinking water standard for NDMA, California's initial 1998 notification level was revised to its current 0.01 microgram per liter concentration in 2002, with a corresponding response level of 0.3 micrograms per liter. In 2006, OEHA established a public health goal of 0.003 micrograms per liter based on carcinogenicity, and that PHG is currently under review with a draft revised value approximately an order of magnitude lower than the present value. In the meantime, staff completed a multi-laboratory validation of an analytical method for nitrosamines in drinking water in 2023, and ELAP accreditation is now available. This will allow us to work toward augmenting the rather sparse NDMA dataset currently available to support cost and exposure estimates. For water systems, this potentially means monitoring orders, hopefully later this year. Staff are planning to hold a staff workshop on preliminary occurrence data and cost estimates over the next couple of years. And as noted earlier, NDMA may be considered with other disinfection byproducts for rulemaking. The completion of the method validation and the availability of ELAP accreditation, along with the new analyte-specific public health goals for the trihalomethanes and haloacetic acids, meant that disinfection byproducts as a whole were bumped up to a higher priority on this year's list. Next slide, please. Fifth on the list of proposed MCL priorities is styrene. Styrene is an organic chemical, a precursor to polystyrene, and widely used to make rubber and plastics. Styrene currently has a maximum contaminant level of 100 micrograms per liter and a detection limit for purposes of reporting set equal to the public health goal of 0.5 micrograms per liter. OEHA updated the public health goal in 2010 to reflect its carcinogenicity and concurrently established a health protective value of 4 micrograms per liter based on genotoxicity and adverse impacts during gestation. Source monitoring shows little occurrence of styrene, with 2 micrograms per liter as the highest reported value in the last decade, and no detections above the health protective value. Based on occurrence data, staff expect that attainment of at least the health protective value will be feasible. Rulemaking package development will continue to take a backseat to higher priority projects, but we're currently projecting being able to hold a preliminary occurrence data and cost workshop later this year. And we were able to post preliminary occurrence data last fall. Next slide, please. Last on the list of proposed MCLs is a combined rulemaking for revisions to the cadmium and mercury MCLs. Cadmium is a naturally occurring element found in soil and mineral deposits, metal plating discharges, runoff from waste batteries, plastic pigments, and galvanized pipe corrosion. And cadmium currently has an MCL of 5 micrograms per liter and a detection limit for purposes of reporting of 1 microgram per liter. OEHA updated its 1999 cadmium public health goal in 2006 to 0.04 micrograms per liter based on kidney toxicity. Mercury is another naturally occurring element found in soil and mineral deposits, refinery and factory discharges, and landfill and cropland runoff. Mercury currently has an MCL of 2 micrograms per liter and a DLR of 1 microgram per liter. The current 2005 mercury public health goal is 1.2 micrograms per liter based on kidney toxicity. The cadmium and mercury MCL revisions will be combined on the basis of like health effects and similar treatment processes. DLR revisions are expected to be proposed with other metals later this year in advance of the MCLs. We're planning to issue a call for papers on best available technology along with arsenic prior to holding at least one pre-rulemaking workshop and eventually publishing a notice of proposed rulemaking. Next slide, please. Moving away from the MCLs, on-site treated non-potable water systems. 2018 legislation directed the State Water Board by the end of 2022 to adopt regulations for risk-based water quality standards for on-site treatment and reuse of non-potable water for non-potable end uses in multifamily, residential, commercial, and mixed-use buildings. The regulations would not address any untreated gray water systems used exclusively for subsurface irrigation and would not address untreated rainwater systems. The regulations are required to include at a minimum risk-based log reduction targets for the removal of pathogens, notification and public information requirements, water quality monitoring and reporting requirements, and cross-connection controls. In addition to developing regulations of our own, we're also required to act as a consultant to the Department of Housing and Community Development as they prepare any necessary corresponding building standards to support the risk-based water quality standards. Targeted stakeholder outreach began around the middle of 2021, and with the completion of the cross-connection control policy handbook, we are ready to move with this. So formal rulemaking is expected to start with issuance of the notice of proposed rulemaking in the next several weeks, with board consideration toward the end of the year. Next slide, please. Next, we have the lead and copper rule. For background, fixtures and plumbing materials are the primary source of these contaminants in drinking water. Regulation is based on percentages of sampled homes exceeding action levels requiring consumer notification and corrosion control rather than MCLs with compliance assessed at the tap. US EPA's 1991 lead and copper rule has been revised several times now, most recently last year when EPA promulgated its long-term improvements to the rule. So since the 1991 original lead and copper rule, there have been minor revisions in 2004, the short-term revisions in 2007, the 2021 long-term revisions or LCRR, and last year's improvements to the rule or LCRI, which were issued in October 2024. Next slide, please. For those last two rule changes or revisions, some key changes in the long-term revisions include the addition of school and child care facility sampling requirements. Sampling occurs at least once over each 5-year period or an average of 20% of facilities sampled each year. There were new tap sampling procedures, including sampling the 5th liter at lead service lines and using wide mouth sample bottles for sample collection, a lead trigger level at 10 micrograms per liter to prompt reevaluation of corrosion control, and requirements for lead service line inventories and replacements for the entire service line, including the customer side. In addition, there were a new public notification requirements. Next slide, please. Then for the lead and copper rule improvements, those revisions included achieving 100% lead pipe replacement within 10 years, tracking lead connectors and replacing those as they're encountered, annual service line materials updates, changes to the sampling requirements, a lower lead action level, eliminating the existing trigger level, requirements to provide pitcher or point of use devices to building occupants for systems with multiple exceedances, and deferral of corrosion control requirements for water systems, removing at least 20% of the lead in certain galvanized service lines per year for 5 years after triggering corrosion control treatment requirements. This rule, unlike PFAS, was late enough that it is, I think, being reviewed by the federal administration, so we'll see how that goes. But we are looking to proceed with the DLR revision for lead this spring, and the primacy revisions will depend on the timing and scope of the new administration's review. Next slide, please. Approximately 1/3 of contaminants with primary drinking water standards have detection limits for purposes of reporting, or DLRs, set at higher concentrations than their corresponding public health goals. For those contaminants, staff's ability to evaluate public exposure between the public health goal and the DLR is limited, as is the ability to evaluate the economic and technological feasibility of lowering the MCL. So staff's been coordinating with the Environmental Laboratory Technical Advisory Committee, or LTAC, to identify reporting limitations of analytical methods and to evaluate laboratory capacity and costs for reporting to lower concentrations. As staff determined that lower reporting levels can be achieved with adequate laboratory capacity, we're proposing revising the DLRs to allow collection of data to better inform the MCL review process. While we initially prioritized lead, staff have since decided to bundle DLR revisions for metals, as most are analyzed using the same suite of analytical metals. And following a series of lab surveys on analytical costs and capabilities, a pre-rulemaking workshop was held in late 2022 on a proposal of new and revised DLRs for several metals, including first-time DLRs for metals with secondary standards. Staff expect to publish a notice of proposed rulemaking on that this spring. Work on DLRs will continue after that with commencement of lab surveys on methods for synthetic organic compounds over the coming year. Next slide, please. Next are notification and response levels, and I'm going to focus on the numbers in bold here, but the rest are just provided for context since there's a lot going on with PFAS. Notification level recommendations have been requested for a total of 9 PFAS contaminants. Of those, notification and response levels have been issued for 4 of those: PFOA, PFOS, PFHXS, and PFBS. We received a recommendation for a PFHXA notification level last fall, and staff are reviewing the recommendation and plan to propose notification and response levels later this spring, followed by the required informational item and final issuance. Next slide, please. Another notification and response level: manganese is naturally occurring in the environment and is an essential nutrient. Elevated levels, however, in delivered drinking water may cause adverse health consequences. Elevated levels in drinking water may be episodic in response to distribution system maintenance. In particular, the adverse health effects that they can cause include developmental toxicity with extended ingestion at elevated levels, causing impairment to memory, attention, and motor skills. Well, there's no primary drinking water standard for manganese. We do have a secondary MCL of 50 micrograms per liter based on aesthetics, above which manganese may cause discolored water and staining of plumbing fixtures and laundry. California has established manganese notification and response levels at 500 and 5,000 micrograms per liter respectively, while US EPA has established a health advisory of 300 micrograms per liter. There's currently no public health goal. Staff proposed revised manganese notification and response levels and held a board informational item in 2023. Staff have considered comments received, have continued to participate in industry work group meetings on manganese, and we'll be following up with a second informational item later this spring. For manganese, in addition, a DLR is being proposed as part of the metals DLR rulemaking package, and the division is planning to request a public health goal for manganese. Next slide, please. In 2021, the Division of Drinking Water requested that a WEHA prepare notification level recommendations for microcystin and cylindrospermopsin and an evaluation of anatoxin A and saxitoxin data, leading to notification level recommendations if appropriate. WEHA provided their recommendations in 2 memoranda in 2021 and 2022, summarized on the slide, with the US EPA health advisories also shown for comparison. For background, microcystin is a hepatotoxin released by some species of blue-green algae or cyanobacteria. It can cause skin conditions such as rashes, hives, or blisters, gastrointestinal symptoms, allergy or asthma-like conditions, and liver damage. Pets and other animals that drink the water can also be sickened by this toxin. In 2015, US EPA issued a 10-day health advisory of 0.3 micrograms per liter for children under age 6 and an advisory of 1.6 microgram per liter for adults and older children. Another cyanotoxin caused by harmful algal blooms, cylindrospermopsin, has an EPA-issued 10-day health advisory of 0.7 microgram per liter for younger children and 3 micrograms per liter for older children and adults based on adverse effects to the liver and kidney. Anatoxin A is another cyanotoxin associated with deaths in domestic animals, livestock, and waterfowl due to neurotoxicity, especially respiratory paralysis. US EPA prepared a health effects support document in 2015 in which it found insufficient studies and occurrence data to adequately support development of a health advisory at that time. Finally, saxitoxin is also a neurotoxin produced by some cyanobacteria. It's more commonly associated with paralytic shellfish poisoning. Since no validated analytical method is currently available for saxitoxin, we are working to remedy that prior to issuing notification and response levels for that toxin and expect to see the saxitoxin method validation completed this spring. Once that's done, we expect to proceed with notification and response level proposals later this year. Next slide, please. Next on the list is primacy package approvals. California has been granted primary enforcement authority for the Safe Drinking Water Act, known as primacy, by US EPA for California public drinking water systems. To maintain primacy, we must promulgate legally enforceable regulations for California that are no less stringent than the federal regulations. This is typically work performed after the rulemaking is completed. In instances where EPA identifies needed changes, some items may require follow-up rulemaking efforts that may appear in front of the board. For this year, however, the only item the board or public should expect to see is a package of minor revisions, including changes to address stringency requirements for the federal public notification rule. That notice of proposed rulemaking is expected to be issued this spring. Next slide, please. Many of our regulations are heavily dependent on water quality data. Water quality data are necessary for compliance assessment, health exposure estimates, and economic and technological feasibility evaluations. We'd like all of these analyses to be conducted with data in which we have a high degree of confidence, data of known and documented quality. The electronic format currently specified in regulations for submittal of drinking water analytical results no longer reflects either current federal regulatory requirements for data integrity and enforceability or the current data system. The Division of Drinking Water has implemented a data intake system that allows receipt of the data California needs ahead of transmitting the federally required data to use EPA's data portal after conducting extensive outreach and training to laboratories serving public water systems. The current electronic reporting regulations need to be updated to specify the selected format. And a 2022 statutory change now allows this rulemaking to proceed as an emergency regulation, and we expect to bring this to the board for consideration later this year. Next slide, please. Since 1997, Health and Safety Code Section 116365 has required that maximum contaminant levels, or MCLs, be set at concentrations as close to the public health goal as is economically and technologically feasible, placing primary emphasis on protection of public health, and then to come back and review existing MCLs at least once every 5 years and to evaluate whether it's feasible to achieve greater protection of public health and closer attainment of the public health goals. When reviewing existing MCLs, we're trying to see if there are any technological or economic feasibility barriers to providing materially greater protection of public health or closer attainment of the applicable public health goal as required by statute. Of the existing MCLs, approximately 2/3 are not yet at or below the respective public health goals and are considered as part of this review. As other priorities permit, staff will continue in the comprehensive review of best available technologies and technological feasibility and will be looking to prioritize MCLs for revision based on health impacts and other factors, including consideration of factors listed in the current Racial Equity Action Plan. Next slide, please. Last on the list of this year's proposed regulatory priorities is financial assurance regulations. Since the mid-1990s, Health and Safety Code Section 116375 has required that regulations be adopted establishing minimum acceptable financial assurances that a public water system must submit as a demonstration of its capability to provide for the ongoing operation, maintenance, and upgrading of the system, including compliance with monitoring and treatment compliance and contingencies. For privately owned systems not regulated by the California Public Utility Commission or CPUC, the financial assurance may be in the form of a trust fund, surety bond, letter of credit, insurance, or other acceptable equivalent financial arrangement. No deadline was set in statute for this, and these regulations have not been established. We found that inadequate financial reserves are a significant factor in water system inability to maintain compliance, and a lack of any financial standards or financial data reporting requirements has impacted SAFER's ability to assess both risk and needs. More recently, Senate Bill 1188 added sections 116600 and 116601 to the Health and Safety Code, which now require the State Water Board to develop and adopt minimum standards related to the technical, managerial, and financial, or TMF, capacity of community water systems serving fewer than 10,000 people or 3,300 service connections, and non-transient, non-community water systems that serve kindergarten through 12th grade schools. With related rulemaking subject matter, regulations for these may be combined into a single rulemaking effort, but formal rulemaking on this topic is not expected to start for a few years. Next slide, please. In addition to the proposed regulatory priorities for this year, we wanted to provide a sort of regulatory priorities preview of additional topics and contaminants that we're keeping an eye on and setting up for eventual rulemaking. You may recall back in 2019, we requested a development of a public health goal for 1,4-dioxane so that MCL development can proceed. OWIHA is actively working on that. With a lot of the work for PFAS done, they should be able to move along on some of these other requests now more rapidly. We're also reviewing available information on nitrosamines to evaluate whether to establish notification levels or revise existing notification levels or request public health goals for any other than NDMA, and have recently completed a multi-laboratory validation for N-nitrosomorpholine or NMOR and other nitrosamines so that we can collect appropriate data. We're also looking at additional MCL revisions. We're especially keeping an eye on Legionella and other issues associated with pest distribution systems and premise plumbing, and are considering updating monitoring requirements. For perchlorates, and of course PFAS stage 2, but for perchlorate, all community and non-transient, non-community water systems should have tested for perchlorate under one of the revised DLRs by the end of this year, which will approximately coincide with the release of the promised draft federal regulation. So we'll consider when and how best to proceed with perchlorate around that time. And then, of course, we've got additional primacy packages waiting for us with EPA. Next slide, please. So here's the total condensed list of priority regulation work for this year. This is not a list of the order of completion. It is a list of the rules that we're proposing to devote the bulk of our rulemaking resources to this year. Next slide, please. And this is what the timelines look like and what to expect to see in front of the board this year, and some of the pre-rulemaking work that's going on this year. Next slide.
Thank you, Ms. Hall. Mr. Polhamus, just the incredible work I know the Division of Drinking Water is constantly doing here, and especially on the even the regulatory side. You know, it reminds me certainly how fortunate we are here in the state of California to have the Division of Drinking Water as we do. A lot of other states less well-resourced don't have the Division of Drinking Water, have their own, you know, robust regulatory programs, and instead are really reliant on the federal government and setting and being protective of public health. And it's challenging to set national standards. Certainly, we know how difficult it is to set standards here within the state, as large as it is as well. But just the continual focus on public health, protecting Californians here, and continuing to ensure that we're keeping an eye on emerging threats or existing threats that we know we need to continue to address. So appreciate the transparent nature that we're here, making sure that we're communicating to folks. I know for members of the public, perhaps listening at home, it can sound a bit scary and daunting, all the various chemicals and you know, the work that's being done here. But I think it's important, again, to remember that we have a very robust regulatory program here in the state of California, have dozens of maximum contaminant levels that are more stringent or exist where none on the federal side do. And we know there are emerging threats. So being able to prioritize, obviously, the PFAS work is important. I'll note I did appreciate that we're also prioritizing disinfection byproducts, something, you know, most folks maybe aren't necessarily aware of or thinking of as much. I know there was recent articles around recent studies around the concern that disinfection byproducts may contribute to cancers, and importantly then being able to respond to, again, those threats, emerging science or understanding of threats to public health through drinking water, and respond with actual work and protective measures is just incredibly appreciated among all the other work and jobs that the Division of Drinking Water does. I know supporting our systems through emergencies and otherwise. So just thanks. Really appreciate this space. I'll give nod as well to the cyanotoxin work. I think that's incredibly important. As we know, we're just seeing a lot more incidences of harmful algal blooms. And so, you know, again, the ability for us here to kind of keep an eye on these threats, adapt, adjust, and put in protective measures is just incredibly appreciative. And hopefully, you know, for folks that, you know, members of the public, others that may be watching and, you know, are maybe tuning in and hearing some of this work for the first time, I think important to really connect with your local water system. You know, again, we have a large state, a lot of different systems. Not all systems are worried perhaps as on some of these maximum contaminant levels or contaminants than other systems. And so really encourage folks to look at their consumer confidence report that comes out from their local water district, understand what is being detected, what's being seen at that local level, because again, we're talking at the aggregate here statewide as we pursue these various contaminants. So no actual further question for me. I just really appreciate this work, the ability, again, to be able to address public health here with resources within the state. Looking to fellow board colleagues, if there's question, comment. Board Member Morgan.
And thank you. I always enjoy this item each year. It's really nice to see not only just the work that is ahead of us, but just how much work you're completing and just how much is moving forward. I also just really do appreciate just the transparency of how the work is being prioritized and how you're looking at, I want to say, grouping the work to really look at the different treatment technologies and how we can have some gains, some wins with having the different constituents grouped together as we move them through, and then having one treatment technology put in place that can treat multiple constituents. And so that really, for me, it's really helpful and helps to really move forward protecting the communities throughout California. I just have one clarification. I just want to make sure that, and we've discussed this, so I just want to make sure that I still am understanding correctly, just for the PFAS, PFOA, that we're talking about the long chains when we're looking at the current the groups. And so you did mention, Ms. Hall, the ultra short, and if I recall correctly, the short, there's still, while those are still at play, more research is being done to really understand the impacts and how those are. Can you finish that for me? I'm going to mess up my words.
Yes, I think most of, there's a huge range. There's the ultra short chain, long chain. There's just so many, you heard there's over 10,000 variations of different types of PFAS. There's a lot out there. So there's not as much health information for each individual chemical, but there's more for those long chain. EPA doesn't currently include some of the ultra short chains in their definition of PFAS, but we wanted to be prepared for whatever path California needs to take to protect public health down the road. So we are looking at a methodology to capture those as well.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, if I could just expand on
Yes.
that a tiny bit. So just to make everybody aware, the testing we're doing at the disadvantaged communities through the funding that was given to us by the state includes work on the short change. So we're one of the few states that is looking into how widespread they are, where they may exist. At the same time, I'm sure there are studies going on around the health impacts that we don't know at the point, so that we can bring those two together in the near future and make a decision as to how to proceed regarding those.
Okay, thank you. That's really helpful. I just want to make sure that we are being clear and transparent as we're speaking to them. And so if someone hears PFAS, PFOA, they understand that, yes, we are looking at the whole spectrum. At the same time, there is more research being done on those ultra short chains to see what are the health impacts, so that as we do move forward, we are treating them appropriately. And we're not, there's, I think at times there could be a somewhat of a miscommunication if we just speak to that bigger picture. We just say, hey, well, PFAS, and then later we come back and we say, oh, these ones here aren't as bad. And it's like, wait a minute, I told it they were all bad. So I just want to make sure that we're being clear on that little aspect of it, and that we really are looking at the whole spectrum. We really are trying to move, we're moving everything forward, and really are understanding the wide variety of PFOA and PFAS that are out there, and looking at the treatment for all of those and making sure that we are taking appropriate steps.
Yes, correct.
And thank you.
Thank you, Board Member. Board Member McGuire.
Thank you for the annual update and presentation. I'll keep my comments brief. I care very much about drinking water, and I could talk about this for many hours. But I'm very impressed with the work you're doing, and I really like that you started with the reflection on what's been recently accomplished. Just thinking about the direct potable reuse regulations and hexavalent chromium, really done a lot to advance the ball in terms of ensuring not only do we have health protective drinking water standards in the state, but we're leveraging new sources of water supply for building water resilience, and really providing tools for folks to be able to adapt to climate change and the challenges that we have before us. So we're both breaking new ground, leaning in on technological improvements, and also at the same time trying to lift all boats and ensure that everybody is receiving safe drinking water. And that's no small feat. It's a huge task, and I can see that's part of the struggle, is because there are so many different headings. There's so many different contaminants. Water is so complicated, just the matrix and how it interacts with the human body is something that I've had a growing appreciation for over time. So when I look at this list, and we've talked about this many times, so it's daunting. It is. And just looking at the priorities for this year, and then looking at the future year priorities, and reflecting on that, the work and the backlog that you have, frankly, to accomplish all of these items is many, many years of work, at least. So two things. One is on the prioritization list that you have for this year. It seems like a number of those kind of pop up and have been popping up annually, just in my reflection of these discussions kind of year after year. So I'm hoping, and it looked like you're fairly ambitious with the number of the proposed rulemakings that you anticipate coming out with in the spring. And so I just challenge you a little bit in terms of being realistic about what you can actually accomplish with the team that you have, knowing that you've already got a lot of work going on. And I agree with the priorities generally in the order that you have them, but let's continue to try and move forward with the things we can. And I'm okay, saying, hey, at these annual updates that we're only going to be able to get one of these through a year or two or whatever the case may be, versus saying we're going to move forward simultaneously with 5 or 6 rulemakings, and maybe that being a lot to bite off on. So just for future updates, just thinking through realistically, what is it that we're trying to tackle? You try to get to that with the priorities, but then it becomes too many priorities. So I think this is, to me, when I look at this list, it's more of a 2-3 year long workload potentially. The other comment I just wanted to make is that just also reflecting on prior year discussions, is last year we talked about maybe a workshop or an information item, thinking about how do we set priorities in the first place. And I'm really focused on the future year priorities, not so much the list that you've shared for this year, but how do we look at risk? How do we look at making those decisions in terms of human health protective levels, feasibility, and identifying when new contaminants of emerging concern pop up and how we handle them. And we talked a lot last year about this, and we talked about also public trust and how we continue to message and build public confidence in the water system that we have, because I agree with the chair that in California we have a more protective system and set of regulations than many other states in the country, and we should be proud of that. Not saying we don't have a lot of work to do and there aren't a lot of things out there that we should be concerned about. We absolutely should be. But I think being transparent about that and having a way to solicit public input and a dialogue in terms of how those priorities are set and what that process looks like, I think in the long run will be helpful for all of us. So I just wanted to bring that up again and elevate that and say that I'm still interested in that discussion. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you, board member. Look at two. I think we're good then. And there are no further commenters here. So just, again, a lot of appreciation to Mr. Polhemus. I don't know if there's anything you wanted to be able to
Yeah,
add
if I could
as well.
just close out quickly on a couple things. I appreciate all the comments from the board members, and definitely we keep working towards trying to have a public meeting on priority setting. It always seems to get crunched with the limited resources we have and trying to deal with the priorities that are before us, but it's never left the list, so we will keep focusing on moving that forward. I think reflecting on several board members' comments, one thing that we kind of realized earlier this year is that we talk about all of these things, all of these minor problems associated with our drinking water system, and we don't take a moment to fully reflect how actually safe it is. We're refining the last 1% of risk or some small number like that associated with our drinking water. And I think we scare the public a lot of times with really fancy chemical names that sound very scary and the likes. And as you alluded to, Chair Esquivel, there's 25 MCLs in the state of California that are more stringent, more health protective than the US EPA set limits, and we have 14 that they don't even have. And so we should be very proud in California that we present probably one of the safest set of regulatory requirements for drinking water in the nation associated with the work we've done to push hard and make sure that we are as close to the public health goal as conceivably possible, and that we can achieve there. So we are going to do some things to try to help communicate that. One of the things that I hope to have soon is a report out of exactly how many measures of drinking water quality are taken in the state. I'm sure it's tens of millions a year, and then we find 2 or 3 that are in violation. and try to really show the level of effort the water systems in the state do to continuously monitor and protect and provide really healthful water that's pure and wholesome to the public, and kind of balance the communication like we have here today of the scary chemical names with the fact that we are monitoring for all of these things to really provide a valuable resource to our public. So it's not lost on me that we often lose our public in our conversation and down in the weeds here on the chemical names and the like. So just wanted to highlight that is coming forward, and something we'll work on in the future to try to communicate better about that so that people can have real confidence in what they're paying for when they're paying their water bill, and how they're using it for their families and the like. So hope to do that soon. And then just a reminder for the board members, we do have a change sheet of our resolution for you to consider, and I believe it's only change sheet number 2 you need to approve. Change sheet number 1 didn't quite make the full correction, so when you're making your motion, if that is something you will consider, please. Appreciate that. Thank you.
And you have 1 speaker card.
Yeah, I appreciate that, Mr. Polhemus, and just thank you for all of that. We did have a late speaker card addition here, and apologize, Adam Wachtel. Please, would like to call you up for a comment. You should be invited to unmute here.
Yeah, thank you so much for the opportunity. I believe I'm connected now. I'd like to encourage the board regarding priorities to focus on some really basic fundamentals of drinking water regulation. Oftentimes as an operator, I see, just non-compliance with the total coliform rule, for example, and that's a fundamental, basis of drinking water protection. Are water systems that chlorinate without the knowledge of their LEA or their LPA or DDW. I asked, it was Katie Landau of CalEPA. I met with her, and she said, you encouraged me to participate in the priorities, but I didn't see any way that the priorities list was really open for a lot of discussion. Another concern I had was, why is the contaminant lead, the heavy metal, not sampled or required to be sampled at the same frequency in groundwater as, say, arsenic or cadmium or chromium? To me, that's very odd. So there's some very basic fundamentals that I think need to be added to the priorities. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Wachtel. I do appreciate those comments, and encourage you to, if you have feedback on the priorities, and as we, have an opportunity, and appreciate Board Member McGuire's request, I agree we should be having some space for discussion around the priorities additionally, but your comment here is well taken nonetheless, and ultimately just continue to communicate with our folks on challenges that you see. But appreciate your comments here. Thank you, Mr. Wachtel. All right, looking to fellow board colleagues, if there isn't any further discussion, I think we prepare for a motion.
Great. Well, I will move to adopt the resolution under item 3 with change sheet number 2 and not change sheet number 1.
I'll second.
Thank you both. Ms. Tyler, can you please call a roll call vote?
Board Member McGuire?
Aye.
Board Member Morgan?
Aye.
Board Member Firestone?
Aye.
Vice Chair Diadamo?
Aye.
And Chair Esquivel?
Aye.
Thank you.
Thank you as well. The resolution is adopted, and just again, a lot of thanks to the Division of Drinking Water. Look forward to what I know will be a lot further discussion as the year unfolds on the many priorities here. So thank you. All right, that wraps up item number 3 and brings us to our last item of today's agenda, which is just board member reports. Looking to fellow board colleagues, they have reports.
I do not have a report.
This past Saturday was a speaker at the California Water Law Symposium that they do annually. And there was a lot of good participation from staff and many stakeholders on a good variety of things, everything from SGMA to tribal uses, to recycle water and more. So I always really enjoyed that and appreciated being invited.
Yeah, just a quick update. On February 7th, I had the opportunity to pinch hit, if you will, and speak at the Delta Leadership Program put on by the Delta Protection Commission. So I thank Vice Chair Diadama for that opportunity. It was a panel on just Delta issues generally. Had John Herrick with South Delta Water Agency, Nancy Vogel with Department of Water Resources, Nina Hawk with Metropolitan Water District, and myself. And so we had a good discussion about a host of issues in the Delta and challenges that are faced there. I did have to leave the room a couple of times for obvious topics that I wasn't able to participate in, and I just wanted to emphasize that I did do that. And so, but nonetheless, I think for that, it's a really good program to educate community leaders, policymakers, and others, just members of the public, on Delta issues, and many of which just really don't have much of a background in water rights, California water, and just getting them up to speed and having that discussion was, for me, really encouraging to see the interest and excitement about some of these topics that we're faced with. So, thanks.
That's great. Thank you, board member. I'll just note on February 7th, yes, I was in Los Angeles. I was touring around with Sean McCarthy with our Division of Drinking Water and some staff, just meeting with especially the smaller water systems impacted by fires. So just really appreciate, I know the great work that continues to go on in our emergency management program and also at the Division of Drinking Water supporting systems as they try to recover from incredible disasters. So yeah, it's the only public item that I have here. Okay, with that, we are done with our agenda items here. We will be going into closed session though on the Delta Conveyance Project, not on the other two item sites or Title VI. And do we know what room we'll be in, Mr. Sawyer?
I don't know either.
Okay.
I guess you can set it.
Well, we'll probably, I'll guess, we'll either be in the room here in the hallway at 2:30 or up in 2510. So let's go ahead and just say 2510 if that's available, or do you know, Mr.
I don't know about the room, but let's assume 2510 and I can send out a note if it changes. But timing wise, we've got a Delta work group meeting today from 1 to 3.
Yeah.
And I know board member Morgan would like to attend that. And I assume there's probably another board member who would like to, Vice Chair Diadama. And so there's a bit of a conflict there. I don't know, we could we could do closed session sooner. I don't know how long it'll take, or we could do it at 3.
If it works for folks, and I mean, this is trying to game out closed session, maybe not lasting more than an hour and a half, but if we say we can convene at 11:30 up in 2510 and just get it out of the way then? Okay. All right, we'll convene for closed session here up in 2510 at 11:30. We'll be closed out and adjourned after that moment. We have a continuation of this board meeting tomorrow, and we will have our Sustainable Groundwater Management probationary hearing for the Kern Subbasin. That will begin at 9 a.m., so we will see everyone tomorrow at 9 a.m. We'll be in recess until then. And with that, thank you everyone for the good morning meeting here. Appreciate all the contribution and thought. See you tomorrow.